All right, everybody, welcome to our webinar brought to you by Talent Board and, of course, featuring Eightfold. We've got a great webinar ahead. We're going to be talking about talent acquisition and artificial intelligence and about accelerating the skills-based organization, your skills-based organization, and a great webinar ahead. Let me introduce our presenters today, and then just a few housekeeping items. We've got Carly Ackerman from Eightfold, and we've also got Stefan Premdas from Noom, Head of Talent Operations. Great information they're going to be sharing with you today. We're going to be recording this, but we're glad that you're here live with us today as well. If you've got questions as you hear things that you're curious about and would like to learn more, please make sure to submit them either to the Q&A part of the Zoom dashboard, or the chat function works too. We've got some poll questions that we're going to be sharing. They're going to be asking you some questions to answer in the chat as well. So we want to make this as interactive as possible and make it as valuable for you as possible as well. So without further ado, I am going to go into the background, and Carly, I'm going to let you take it over.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much for having us. I will be stepping us through the majority of the content today. That said, I've invited Stefan along to back me up in terms of his talent acquisition expertise. So he'll be peppering in a lot of stories from the field. And as the agenda might suggest here, this is really going to be more of an adventure than a line by line checking off each of these items. So we're really excited and really asking you to engage us as we go. I'm a former teacher, so I can't help myself but start with a pop quiz. So we're asking you with this first pop quiz to actually use the chat feature. And the question we want you to think about is, what is a skills-based organization? So right from the jump, we're going to test your knowledge of the topic we're discussing today. And while you're responding to that, I was hoping that, Stefan, maybe you can give us your ideas on what a skills-based organization is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's basically kind of the direction that we will all inevitably be heading in the very near future if the organization isn't already there. Skills-based organization really focuses on the deconstruction of this job architecture that we've set up for several years now, which has really just been focused on, we have an individual, we have this person who sits in this particular role and they do these respective responsibilities. But in reality, what we're going to be moving to is more of a focus on having a person with an array of skills that are going to be tackling a series of responsibilities. So I think that shift right there is really kind of where we're heading in the future.
Awesome. And I'm seeing some responses coming in. Skills are the new currency. Definitely been hearing that a lot. Competency models is a thing of the past. An organization that embeds skills throughout all of its functions. So not just talent acquisition, but other parts of the HR organization. So we'll be getting to that as well. Focuses on skills in lieu of experience and education. Definitely going to be talking on that as well.
Love that one mentioned.
All right, one more question before we move on. What do you think is required to enable a skills-based organization? So what are some of those critical enablers that you need to actually move the needle from thinking about skills-based organization to actually becoming one? And Stefan, again, would love to hear how you've thought about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest proponent for this is going to be, an appetite for change. And being able to facilitate that conversation, beyond the HR people bubble, but into the actual organization and making it part of the business conversation as well. I think as we continue to think about how we are going to shape the future of our workforce, we need to be more cognizant of, people's experiences, people's backgrounds, degrees, educations. It becomes less of a focus, because the reality is what we really need to do is to answer a couple tasks or responsibilities. And I think as we start to continue to think about change as well, ability to focus on analytics and technology in partnership to building out pretty robust business processes is going to be really what we need to double down on.
I'm looking at the answers coming in. We may have stumped the crew here. They're coming in a little slower this time, but I am seeing technology as a category, but specifically internal talent marketplace platforms, assessments and training for both current and prospective employees. So I think that goes for both understanding skills, but also to your point before about change management, the training piece of this, making sure people really understand some of those enablers that we're introducing. Leadership buy-in, that's going to be a hot topic towards the end of this discussion, because of course we're going to tell you how to do it, and then we're going to reveal the fact that we know it's very difficult. So we'll be touching on that as well. Let's see. Business buy-in and governance, also super important. Awesome. All right, let's keep going. So talent crisis, old news at this point. Power has really shifted from employers to the workforce, but we need to start asking ourselves questions like, how can we start to make meaningful changes to the way we approach talent? How can we position talent acquisition as a strategic enabler to the business? How can we show that a strong approach to talent acquisition is actually a competitive and strategic advantage for an organization? So, we've been thinking and seeing these headlines forever now. We have to start acting upon them. So toward the end of 2021, as I'm sure many of you know, some of the leading voices in business and HR analysis put forward their annual HR predictions. Really love it when those come out. You can start thinking critically about, where do you want to head? What's your North Star for the next year? Across the board, skills, recruiting, and the convergence of TA and internal mobility ranked among the top trends and predictions. So we saw Josh Burson. I'm sure folks on the line are very familiar with Josh. Number 3 for him was related to skills. Number 5, the convergence of talent acquisition and internal mobility. And number 7, talent intelligence and the skills taxonomy. So really bringing them all together through an enabling platform. Forbes even has published about skills. Number 3 for them was strategic and innovative recruitment strategies. So that's thinking about leveraging more inclusive job descriptions and starting to focus more on those transferable skills and certifications in terms of folks' candidacy for roles. And then finally, David Green, his number 4 this year, skills-based organization, called it out explicitly as going to be critical for HR moving into 2022. So Stefan, I know that you expressed some particular interest in this idea of the convergence of TA and internal mobility. I'm wondering what you're thinking about that in terms of how they're linked together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is it's getting harder and harder to hire people. Workforce demand is, is increasing, but the population is not necessarily there to match it. So the reality, again, comes down to how can we better utilize our current resources and staffing to be able to address the new problems or new products that we're going to be producing as a result of this shift in toward digital worlds, and just the speed and agility in which we need to deliver products as a whole. So for me, this has always been an area of just so much interest. Like, how can we provide a framework to our internal employees to be able to understand, hey, these are the skills you have, and these are the roles that are best suited for those skills. Let's think beyond the bubble of like, hey, I've been in this role, I've worked up this ladder, or I've kind of moved in this direction. But instead, is there an opportunity to fill a business need by using just the same skills that I've developed over the course of my career?
Awesome. Yeah. And all of these trends really can be examined through the lens of what analysts are calling the skills-based org, as you see here from David Green. So if we're going to be thinking and talking about skills-based organizations, let's pause for a moment, rewind. What is a skill? And I know this is a big area of debate. So I have broken it down to the basics. Here's a dictionary definition of what a skill is. I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want you to notice what you are not seeing in this definition. You're not going to see an assumption of proficiency levels. You're not going to see anything about a certain amount of experience required to obtain the skill or to gain proficiency. And you're not going to see anything about a certification or degree requirement for a skill. A skill is something that you can achieve from training, experience, or practice, but we know that that looks very different from person to person, from organization to organization. Skills allow us to break work and experience down into a common currency. And I know somebody mentioned that earlier. And that's something that can be analyzed consistently across individuals. That's why we really love skills as a data point. It becomes that common denominator for work and for talent. So now that we're aligned on what a skill is, let's talk about what's a skills-based organization. We probably all have different names for the process steps that comprise the talent lifecycle, but we're providing a super simplified view here: attract, develop, engage, transition. Within that lifecycle, we know there are a number of touch points between the organization and the employee. And who from the organization actually orchestrates those touch points, that's also probably going to vary from company to company. But we typically see some combination of these teams falling under the umbrella of HR. What makes an organization skills-based is the fact that skills sit at the center. Those are they're driving the experience both for HR and from the HR perspective, but also from the employee, and in this case, the candidate perspective. Skills really become that fuel that drive the full process, and they sit at the heart of the talent strategy, which then is tied to the business strategy. So in this way, skills really become that connective tissue, but we now need to ask ourselves, how might we leverage TA to play a bigger role in the picture here? So it's time for everybody's favorite, another pop quiz. This time it's a poll, so we'll give you an opportunity to respond to this question, but we want to hear from you. Where is your organization on its own skills-based organization journey? And while you're doing that, of course, I'm going to put Stefan in the hot seat. So where are you, Stefan? Or where have you been?
Yeah, it's funny, working in the startup world, I feel like I'm constantly in that loop of setting up the foundation and driving it forward. And I think even in a lot of organizations can resonate with that in a lot of respects. To be honest with you, I think where I'm currently at is helping people understand the importance of thinking beyond the job description. Getting people to understand that there's antiquated notions of having, these are the requirements I need in order for us to be able to hire an individual, instead of thinking, these are the skills or, focus areas I need an individual to be able to succeed at, is really kind of the biggest, space that I've been working in. I think with that too, there's a couple different ways I've actually, played at this, and really kind of thinking about how you can convince people to move beyond that antiquated notion and get people into the space of, oh, I didn't even realize that we were doing that. Yeah, that makes sense, and look, it works, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit more later.
I call that Jedi mind tricks.
Exactly.
Here, I'm sharing the results now, Carly.
Awesome. And I can see them as well. So it looks like the bit of a bell curve here, but most folks are falling in we're starting to explore the opportunity phase, which is great. Just looking through the rest.
Got a few
and some have started the plan, the transition. Did you have a reaction, Stefan? Sorry.
Oh no, I was saying we got a few skeptical folks out there. That's good. I like this guy.
That's why you're here.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. One more poll. Has your organization adopted AI to support talent acquisition or HR transformation? So thinking specific to TA or broader to HR, where are you at in terms of your thinking about AI? As the title of this session would suggest, we're going to get into AI. So now's the time. And again, Stefan, would love to hear how you've been thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I am probably one of the biggest proponents I know for automation in HR.
Me too.
It's, coming from a background that was not historically HR, and seeing, focus coming into a lens of, process efficiency and optimization, it's very difficult for me to understand how AI can't have a place in revolutionizing this overall organization and industry. I think the reality is, a lot of folks have this kind of notion that human resources means that we have to be fully human, but in reality, what we can leverage AI to do is focus on the areas that require more human interaction and automate the areas that don't necessarily need that as much. So we can actually become more human as a result of introducing, more automation or artificial intelligence. Personally, within our organization, it's a place where I like to start, because I think a lot of folks, if the second you start challenging the notion of like, this is the way it has to be, and start getting people to realize like, oh, this is the same process. It's the only difference is, I'm not having to think through everything myself, but instead a system that can, infer billions of data points as opposed to maybe my 10, 15, it can now do it for me and get me to the same general point. So this is an easy sell for me, and something I think that's, eventually going to become the status quo for all of HR.
Let's see those results. Wow.
Hey, there we go.
Looks like a lot of folks have already implemented AI and are starting to drive some real outcomes with it. And I'd really love to hear more about that during our Q&A session. And then it kind of peters out from there. Some folks are actively exploring, others, they get the value prop, but haven't necessarily set aside the funding for it just yet. What I have found the most interesting, and Stefan, honestly, in our work together, we even talked about the data and the outcomes from AI yesterday. And what was most surprising to me was the level of discussion that it triggers. And it actually forces us to dig deeper and think more critically about talent and about the ways that we're behaving, to your point, being more human, and how that's actually playing out in the data itself. So thinking through, where are people funneling out through the hiring process and what's going on behind the scenes that's causing that. We're able to do that because we have the power of a machine behind us that helps do all of the, what I consider very difficult work. If you ever ask me to play in Excel, it's not a great day, so that we can have that human conversation. Awesome. All right. So I mentioned Excel, right? We have lots of tools where you can do this. It's manual, but why AI? And I know, there's a lot of obvious reasons. We are far enough along into the 21st century for everybody to probably have an answer to this. We are particularly excited about AI in the talent acquisition space because it unlocks opportunities for candidates and for organizations. AI really allows you to understand the relationships between skills. So we're actually going to step you through a very simplified example. Hopefully this will bring it to life a little bit more. So imagine you're sourcing for a marketing role. So here we're showing, like I said, very simplified view, but essentially these are the skills that are commonly associated with marketing roles. And perhaps that's where you typically look. You look at folks with marketing in their background, you look at their titles, you look at their experience. But what if you could look beyond marketing, to Stefan's point earlier, beyond the job description, to a space that you might not have considered before? So let's take a look at a community management skill set. What the AI is going to reveal for us is that these two are not as dissimilar as we might assume. There are actually some skills that are shared across both roles. So again, very simplified, but showing you the power of being able to understand at a skill level the relationship between these two roles. Now your talent pool for marketing has just expanded. I'm sure there are lots of other roles that we could explore outside of community management when we're thinking about marketing, but we wanted to illustrate for you that TA is the tip of the spear for an organization that's looking to adopt more skills-based organization practices. AI is going to open up populations that you might not have considered for sourcing. And when you're able to understand skill relationships, you're going to find new channels and talent pools that you likely would not have considered. And Stefan, I know this is one of the things that you find most powerful, but do you have a story to tell us here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to pull too much from my history, but I think this has been my story personally. I walked out of university with a biomedical engineering degree, and I'm now sitting and running in talent operations. And a lot of people are like, well, how did you get here? Was it like, what mistakes did you make along the way? No, it's not that. It's just really, along my journey, what I realized is, like, as an engineer, there are certain skills I have. The ability to look at data and pull, insights from them, the ability to understand a process and its components. And I was able to take that and move into business analytics, then move into product management, and then move into HR, because at the end of the day, there was a need for someone to take all those skills, but apply it into the human realm. So whenever I see, opportunities like this is what gets me excited, because we could take someone who, spent all that money to get a degree and realize, like, wow, science really isn't exactly, being in a lab isn't really exactly what I want to do, and give them an opportunity to really find their passion while still using that same exact skill set.
I have to remind myself of your background when you ask me the hard data questions. I need to flip them back on you. All right, so we've talked about the concept, we've talked about the theory. I told you we would get a little bit more tactical and tell you a little bit more about how to do this and where to start. So first and foremost, working with the business is going to be critical. You really want to understand their requirements, but you'll want to do it at the level of skills, which might be a new exercise for them to think about how to break down the work that they're anticipating to the skill level. The second step, really about a mindset shift. Thinking about targeting candidates that are not just based on what they've done in the past, but starting to think about what might these people be able to do in the future based upon their experience and their history. And as you start to identify more of what we would consider non-traditional candidates for roles, you're going to need to put your sales hat on. You need to sell this opportunity to both your hiring managers who might be skeptical about some of these folks who you're bringing forward as candidates. And you're going to need to sell the roles to candidates as well. Maybe they're looking at a role saying, I don't have that experience. They might not think that they're eligible for the role. But if you're able to show them how they match based upon their skills to a role, it's going to be all the more powerful. And then finally, change management. I think it's always going to be difficult, but you really need to make it stick. And this is a long game. So our suggestion is demonstrating success consistently and using data to tell the story. Because once you prove out the efficacy of this new way of sourcing talent enough times, the change actually just becomes the norm. So let's start to bring each of these steps to life. So the reason you want to understand the business requirements at a skill level is so that you have the inputs you need to pinpoint talent. So again, let's imagine you're sourcing for a product manager. You can marry up your business requirements with the data that tells you how product management skills are changing in real time. You're also going to be able to determine where you might look geographically for talent for those skills. And you're going to get a sense of the organizations that have sourced top product management talent in the past. And I'll let Stefan back me up on this, but essentially where you're going to go to poach talent. Where are the best product managers and where are you going to find them? And again, Stefan, welcome you to tell a story here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is one of those spaces where we can take talent intelligence and put it in the hands of sourcers and really get them to a place that they may not have been searching for. We can open up make the pond a little bit bigger and fill it with a lot more fish. And when I kind of think about how this is, played out in some of my past history, there's an actual individual I was working with, a sourcer, and I remember just the amount of difficulty they had working with the pipeline. And I sat them down and kind of walked them through actually Eightfold's research module and said, hey, what skills are you looking for? What is it that really defines this role? And I think that was kind of step one was realizing that was kind of the hard part. Like, how do we kind of pin this down in such a way that we can understand the relationships between them? So after we get those skills, we do a research. We were able to then understand, hey, this skill is similar to this one. What happens if we drop that into the Boolean search? Or this school has a strong efficacy around making sure these skills are developed. What happens if we pull that into the search as well, or similar schools to like that? And that actually allowed the individual to expand their entire talent pool, and I think it almost doubled at one point. And they were reaching out, and it was actually funny because a few of the people they're reaching out to were like, hey, we're not necessarily a good fit for this role. And after that, actually the recruiter turned around and started having connections with them. They were able to explain, like, actually, we're trying to think about this a little bit more expansively. It doesn't necessarily be that you need to check off every single box in this checklist that we have, but do you think that you can do this? Do you think that you can do that? And when the conversation shifted that way, we were able to create a pretty hefty pipeline that the manager was pretty impressed with.
Awesome. And I appreciate you giving me some of the TA tips and tricks here as we thought through this first step. So thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, this second step, all about mindset. You really need to embrace the idea of targeting candidates for their skills, as well as what their skills are going to tell you about their potential. In this case, looking at the banking workforce, so we're mixing it up a little bit. We can see that many of the top skills that banks are sourcing for are related to a variety of other skills. So individuals with risk management skills, they're likely to have financial analysis and portfolio management skills as well. And for the bankers on the line, that might be obvious to you, but that was a revelation for me to kind of think about those adjacent skills. We can also make some data-informed predictions about individuals' likelihood of learning a skill based on these adjacencies. So within the US workforce alone, that's what we're looking at here, we know there are over 3 million people who have risk management skills, but more importantly, we know there are 14 million people with the adjacent skills that would make them highly likely to learn risk management skills quickly. So again, going to expand your potential pool of candidates, in this case, 5.5 times, and that's going to unlock additional opportunities to identify the right person for a role. Any thoughts here, Stefan?
I absolutely love this slide. Not to give you too many pats on the back, but for me, when I kind of look at this, what I think is, COVID has changed everything about how we think about the workforce. From as simple as the fact that, like, oh wow, these roles maybe don't need to be in the office as much as we thought they were, but also it's really sped up the way that we can deliver things. A lot of the C-suite are now understanding, like, oh, we were able to completely pivot to another industry or to a different product so quickly. Why can't we do that all the time? And I think that's really where the power of these, something like this really comes in, is because now we can look at our workforce and say, all right, maybe we don't necessarily have a set of folks that have, best practices or fully defined experience with agile methodologies, but we have a series of individuals who have learned adjacent skills, and they're pretty much similar, and they have a capacity for learning. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the way I think about just, universities in general. For me, it's not necessarily the degree that you get, but it's, college for me has told you, like, you have a piece of paper that shows that you learned how to learn. And I think a lot of cases, that's kind of what we're doing here in a sense. Like, we have the capacity to learn this skill, well, you probably also have the capacity to learn these other ones as well. And once you kind of shift your employee base from that perspective, it really allows you to utilize your workforce so much more effectively.
And I think what you're saying is, for all of my learning people on the line, right? Like, there's such a tight connection between the work you do in talent acquisition and the connection to other phases of the talent lifecycle, specifically around learning as we think about upskilling and reskilling people, which again, of course, ties to internal mobility and making people prepared for whatever their next opportunity might be, hopefully staying with your organization.
Yeah, retention is going to be incredibly impactful here. So I think this is something we need to continue to think about as we move into the future.
Is that an offer to do another webinar, Stefan? All right, so step 3. This is something you can enable with tools and data. We find that a lot of recruiters are really limited by their tools. They're forced to run similar searches in many different places, using up their time doing repetitive keyword-based searches. And this often leads to talent being sourced through some sort of yes or no match. They either have what you're searching for or they don't. With AI-powered tools, recruiters aren't limited to a Boolean search. They can run searches across multiple sources at once, and they can source or surface candidates with adjacent skills. So like the previous slide showed us, not just the exact same match to the search terms that you entered. Recruiters will also be able to consider candidates according to their direct and adjacent experiences rather than solely on their previous titles, or maybe the number of degrees they racked up or the universities they graduated from, really expanding who you're looking at. And finally, you're going to be empowering hiring managers also to leverage both historical information, which is what they have today, but also predictive data. So they get a sense of what the candidate has done before, and they also start to understand what they'll likely be able to do in the future. And Stefan, I know you've used this approach to expand your talent pools and to expand the diversity of your candidates by bringing on folks from non-traditional backgrounds. So can you tell us maybe if you've used a skill trend to convince a hiring manager specifically that they might be looking in the wrong places to source their candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we continue to move forward, thinking of the reality is non-traditional backgrounds are going to be the new. It's going to be where we're moving forward, because The days of you need to be certified in this and you need to have, this degree are gone. People, we have education at, accessible in every dynamic of, our lives, on our phones, on our computers, YouTube, books. Like there's just, it's so accessible now. And the reality is it doesn't take as long to pick up a lot of the skills necessary to do a job as it did historically. So I think when you're working with hiring managers, this is something you almost need to remind them a little bit is what is it we're actually trying to hire this individual to do? And can we break that down into components and understand, hey, what skills do we need to be able to address those respective parts? Oftentimes feels uncomfortable. I mean, for a lot of hiring managers, I think also having the empathy to understand where they're coming from is going to be important here. But, there is that natural tendency is I want to hire someone with software engineering in their title and they should be from these companies and, because that's what they've known. But then if we can start to step back and think about how we're also assessing our talent to be able to understand if they can have these competencies, you start to realize like maybe that's not as important. Maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be from the top schools or the big name companies. Maybe it can be an individual who's 80% of the way there, and all we need is to provide them the L&D that's necessary for them to be that superstar you're looking for. And the reality is you didn't have to spend a bunch more money or a lot more time trying to find that smaller niche set of candidates.
Yeah, and I think we oftentimes hear really incredible stories about people who found their dream job or whatever their next role was because somebody took a chance on them.
Exactly.
How great would it be if taking a chance was something that is kind of a thing of the past because you have the data to tell you this is actually not a risk at all?
And I think the other side of that too is just like the conversation that the level that this creates with your relationship with a candidate is amazing as well, because now you're looking at having a conversation about a candidate about their potential and not necessarily, oh, this is what you've done in the past, you're a good fit. It's this conversation shifts. It's like, this is what you can do, and on top of that, you can do that at X company. And I think that is a harder way for a candidate to be like, no, I'm not interested, because someone looking at you positively and thinking about your future is always going to be a great way to help them.
Yeah, huge component of employment brand as well.
Yes. Absolutely.
All right. Step 4, making it stick. You really need to demonstrate consistent results over time. What better way to do that than with data? The idea is to build those data-driven proof points over time that really illustrate leveraging a skills-first AI-powered approach to talent acquisition is going to unlock opportunities. I feel like a broken record. Making sure that you're identifying the right talent for the right role at the right time. Always fun to tell those one-off stories of when that happens, but here you're able to drive it over and over and over again. And I want to take a moment to zoom in on a very specific piece of this puzzle here and on this slide specifically. Take a look at the large blue wedge on the sourcing channels pie chart. This rediscovered talent was sourced from this organization's extended talent network. And that extended talent network is actually comprised of every individual who has ever interacted with this organization, everyone who's ever applied, maybe attended an event and left their email address, alumni of the organization. They're all included in the talent network, which is dynamically updated regularly based upon publicly available job profile information. So this organization knew, and this is a really great story, and again, this is a real organization's data. They had a former intern who spent a summer working for the organization in college, but was not extended an offer at the end of the internship. About 2 or 3 years later, this person became eligible and a very strong candidate for a full-time role because they were able to access her data and understand the skills that she had gained over time, and also understand where and how she was going to be successful in a given role moving forward. So they love to tell this story about being able to bring in somebody who spent some time with this organization in the past, left and got some really great experience and came back even stronger than before. Stefan, again, curious, have you leveraged any data to support some of the changes that you've brought to your own TA organizations in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for, a lot of the data that, we kind of leverage is even just around the adoption of some of the technology that we've brought in. people helping people understand. The second you talk AI, everyone kind of gets like, oh, it's different. I don't really fully understand it, and they kind of lock down. But to be able to look at, your entire data set, your historical data hires, and be able to understand, hey, the algorithm that's the results of the algorithm is presenting is actually providing a very similar set of candidates as candidates you've hired historically, helps kind of cement people like, oh, okay, so it's basically doing the same thing I'm doing, just quicker and at a larger scale. So I mean, I think that is one massive component as we start to think about making this stick for your actual talent team. I think the other side of it too is helping people to understand their talent pool very, very quickly. That's why I love this blue slice, this rediscover slice. One of the issues I have with CRMs is oftentimes that they're focused on helping you build a talent pool and helping you reach out to them, but not necessarily on refreshing that content from these particular candidates. So a candidate that applied 5 years ago, yeah, you have their resume and maybe you managed to convince them after a series of email blasts to update a new resume, but then that's going to get stale again. So how can you use technology to be able to provide you a fresh outlook of what that candidate's doing as they're creating their profiles on, X amount of public sites? And I think this is where technology really kind of allows people to step up their game in a sense. Because what we're doing now is we're having the ability to have constant refresh data and to be able to assess that individual as they're growing over their career and learning new skills against new roles and the skills required to open those jobs. So we can actually reach out to people and say, hey, we've had our eye on you this entire time. We loved how your career has grown. And now I think you're a great fit for this role. And that really is just no better story than that from an employer branding perspective, or even just from a human perspective. I truly love the ability that we can do this with now technology.
You didn't want to do biomechanics or biomedicine?
Not as rewarding, I guess.
All right, so we've reached our final ask of the audience here. And we're going to ask folks, we want to hear your thoughts. How do you go about getting stakeholder buy-in? And you can contextualize this however you feel works the best. So again, use the chat feature. So, like I said, we told you how you can potentially leverage AI to supercharge your TA and to start bringing more skills-based practices into your organization. But we're real about it. We know that this can be difficult. We know that you need to make a case to leadership, in some cases to the C-suite. So I know you kind of touched on this stuff on a little bit, but have you run into any really difficult challenges of convincing folks that this is the right way to go?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think the most challenging group that I run into is typically the TA team itself. Recruiters may have a flow and it works for them. And what you're doing at the end of the day is you're introducing something new, and to change that process. But I think for me, it's really helping them understand that this is not different. This is just the exact same algorithm that you're running through your head, now brought into a piece of technology. I think beyond that, as you start to look at getting this, sold at a higher level, at the senior or C-suite level, really what it comes down to is understanding what their business needs are and be able to connect that to that. Whenever I'm looking at a piece of technology and trying to sell it, I'm trying to understand why a person would care, about this piece of technology. Is it diversity? Is it our ability to reskill our organization? Is it they want just faster reporting or analytics? And I think that is always kind of the way I position it. Never really to lead with what my end goal may necessarily be, but just to make sure that they understand, like, hey, this piece of technology can address your concern. And while on the back end, understanding the whole entire roadmap that I have played out. I find that helps. I know sometimes it feels a little tricky and, like you said, Jedi mind tricky. But for me, it's really just helping people understand that, a lot of these systems can do a lot of different things, and it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like a lot of change. But the reality is, if we break it down into the smaller problems that we're trying to solve and focus those at the individuals that care the most about them, you can actually bring in a more something like a talent intelligence tool and make it stick quite easily.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat as well is making sure you're bringing data to the table as part of your case for why you need to leverage even more data moving forward. And I think to your point around understanding where folks' motivations are, using that in terms of your search requirements, right? Like as you're thinking about what technology you want to go with, if that technology is not going to be able to provide you insights into diversity goals, right? If that's a top priority for your leadership team, you have to cut that one off the plate. So making sure that you're understanding those specific requirements that are going to be necessary in that solution, they're going to be really important upfront. So I want to shift us to Q&A, but Kevin, I'm going to call an audible and I'm going to ask you to pop up the last poll, and then we can go back to Q&A as folks kind of decide if they want to stick around. But we want to hear from you. Do you want to learn more about talent intelligence and how it can solve your TA challenges or even your HR challenges more broadly? We want to bring more of this type of content to you and to think through this more often. So would love to hear if this is of interest to you. And while you're answering that, we'd also love to open it up to questions.
So Carly, you had me at the football reference audible, so thanks. I totally appreciate that. So thank you both very much. That was a fantastic discussion. I really liked how you ended it, asking how everybody focuses on getting buy-in. And we do have some questions, and it kind of, I'm just curious about this. And Stefan, I wanted to ask you something, because I know earlier when we did the poll about how there's many organizations that we're on today that are just in the beginning of their journey to focus on becoming a skills-based organization. Sometimes I think even for me, I've been drinking the Kool-Aid for a long time. We've been talking about this for a long time in the world of work and the workforce. Why has it taken so long for companies to really get focused? I mean, was it the super accelerator of the pandemic to really change the way everybody thought? Why has it taken so long for that? Out of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of it is the sheer fact that it wasn't as necessary. Businesses believe that they could move a little bit slower and still be effective.
Right.
And like you mentioned, the pandemic just shook that up completely. And business realized like, oh, wow, we could completely pivot and still be an incredibly successful, deliverer of a particular service or product. And as a result of that has really kind of created the shift around, one, we know this is capable. I think the other reason why it's probably taken so long is it's incredibly difficult. If you imagine having to map out for every role or every responsibility, all the skills that are associated to it, and do that at, across the size of your organization, that can be incredibly daunting and probably not the most exciting work.
Right.
And I think to that point, that's where like technology has really been able to help, is because now we can step in and say, hey, give me all the information about your employees, give me all the information from your job descriptions and how you want to calibrate those. And I can infer what the relationships and to the skills are. And I think that those kind of steps, those step function increases in technology has now made it so we can have this conversation without necessarily, making it a 2-year project.
It's a really good point. And I think, there is never a good time, right? Because change is constant. It's going to be hitting organizations. I mean, who plans for a pandemic? And the list goes on of business impacts that happen on an ongoing basis. But I think and right now everybody's hair on fire busy, right? Trying to fill their spots on their team, trying to keep their employees inside the organization right now. But it's definitely something that needs to be focused on. I've got another question that I wanted to ask Carly. So Carly, how there still seems to be a confusion in the marketplace, right? I mean, we keep hearing how important to have this type of smart technology, this AI technology in our tech stack, but how does it fit from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was it.
That's a great question. So I'll speak somewhat generically, but of course, I'm also going to speak a little bit specifically about Eightfold. So enterprise systems, your HRIS, your ATS, they obviously provide super necessary functionality. They're going to be your systems of record, and they help manage processes and compliance. So you have to have them. But that said, they are not systems of intelligence. They are not built on a native AI platform. So with a tool like Eightfold, we bring publicly available data and our global data set. And I think this actually gets at one of the questions I saw in the Q&A queue. and we bring that data together to your existing data. Eightfold is going to unify this data, sync it with your legacy systems, and ensure that your data is clean and compliant. So we're deduplicating, and we're making sure that you have one source of truth. And we're able to establish a bidirectional API sync with your ATS or your HRIS. So it really slots right into the tech stack.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carly. Another question that's kind of related to that too is how, when it comes to defining the correlation between skills and how they're being measured with probability of success, how are you doing that at Eightfold right now?
Is this related to the question that was in the queue as well?
Oh, maybe, yeah, maybe it's a similar question, or maybe that's what you just answered, I guess. Yes.
So the question in the queue, and I think that you're getting at a similar point, is, you know, how, when you're assessing talent, and I'll paraphrase, how do we get predictive? Like, where is the predictive nature of this coming from? Do we have to rely on assessments? So let's think about it at the talent individual level. We're using our AI to understand those relationships between skills. So the billions of data points that we have and the amount of learning that our algorithm has done over time, it's able to predict the relationship between, let's say, skill X and skill Y, similar to that image I showed before, where we're actually able to show, are they mathematically closely related to each other? And we can use that to predict whether or not somebody is going to be able to quickly adjust or gain skill Y based upon the fact that they have skill X. So an assessment can be a really great point in time solution. You know, think about in school, right? You took a test in your math class, and it's testing you on your ability to leverage the skills that you learned in the past month. Yeah. Is it going to help us understand what you're going to know, you know, a year from now? Maybe not. So that's why we say, you know, assessments are great, but I think that they're answering a different exam question, so to speak.
And to add to that too, I mean, I think even beyond the skill framework itself is be able to understand the relationships between companies and particular skills, or job titles and particular skills, is also another place where, you know, talent intelligence can really help you step in, because a lot of times we shift our questions to tell me about a time when. And we, you know, at the end of the day, we're like, person could just be making that up. Like, if they're really creative, they could just come up with an elaborate story and convince you. But there's something, it's a lot harder for an individual to turn around and say, hey, I've worked at this role at this company, I've worked at this role at that company. And over time, you can see that trend over and the relationships to the skills that fall into those job titles or respected within those companies. You can actually start to validate a lot more of those skills better than that one-on-one interaction where we hope that the interviewer or the interviewee is being as honest as possible. Now, granted, they could always make up a resume, and that's when we start getting the conversation around blockchain and HR. But I think, you know, for the most part, we have to trust someone somewhere.
Heard about this interview ghosting.
About blockchain and crypto. Come on. No, right? I'm not sorry, Carly, I interrupted you.
No, I think both making great points. And please don't ask me to come back to do a blockchain webinar. I need at least a PhD for that.
I know, right? Way above my pay grade. So, Stefan, here's another question for you. And this kind of relates to, besides getting buy-in to make some of the changes that you've made, what kind of pushback did you get from other stakeholders, whether it was from business leadership or from the recruiting team itself? And how did you mitigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the biggest pushback is obviously tied to financial, but also to around prioritization. You know, outside of the financial conversation, focusing on the latter one first, it's hard. It can be hard for individuals to understand why we need to do this now. You know, worked at varying size of companies, and, you know, from 60,000 companies to, you know, 500. And for me, it's one of the biggest things I run into is like, are we trying to set up a foundation that is too mature for where we are as a company? And I think for me, it really comes down to, well, do you want this company to be able to scale? And if so, does it not make more sense for us to prioritize setting a framework for a company that can do that? Right. As opposed to trying to undo everything we've done before and then move forward. So, oftentimes the conversation around prioritization is like, should this be, should pulling in a talent intelligence system be something we should be doing right now? Well, the reality is, if we want to make smarter decisions today, then, and hopefully set our company up for success in the future, then we need to start thinking about this. We need to think about our tech stack. We need to think about our business processes, and be able to kind of drive that forward.
Yep. And the recruiting and hiring process, and the external and internal candidate experience, and your own, right, and the employee experience. I mean, that kind of relates to another question that came in. I think that's interesting question about, should we invest in employer branding and updating our EVP prior to doing some of the things that you've outlined in this particular webinar? And I mean, I think that, my quick take is that if you're not making improvements to your processes internally, that I don't know if a new EVP is, may have a short-term gain for you, but there's going to be a long-term issue if there's exponential issues over time. Anyway, Stefan, I don't know if you want to comment on that or not.
Yeah, I actually love this question. I've been eyeing it for a while now. I'm glad we're getting a chance to answer it. I think it's important for a company to understand who they are and what they stand for. That I think is, we really shouldn't be making moves, and we shouldn't be attracting talent until we really fully understand that. That's my perspective. Now we have, sometimes you have to move quick. That being said, do you need to have a fully blown EVP with your positioning and your pillars and all of that set before you can start thinking about AI? Well, maybe so, maybe not necessarily. And the reason why I'm a little more ambivalent about that is because I think understanding who a company is should help shape the technology you invest in.
Sure.
Well, if you are a company that values, having your employees work on the work that's the most effective and moves the needle the furthest, then it makes sense that you should be pulling in AI in order to allow the company to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with individuals doing that tactical work that could be easily be automated. If you are a company that wants to be able to provide an experience, a consistent and high quality experience to every candidate, and not just the first, 20% that you actually manage to get through in your ATS, then you're going to need to, leverage AI to be able to reach out to all individuals, assuming you have a healthy pipeline. And I think it's not necessarily that, it's more of a chicken and egg type situation, because the reality is one is going to help you do the other. So really, they should be kind of forming at the same time. As you develop your EVP, as you develop who you are as a company, you should also be thinking about your tech stack and how that's going to align and help you hit those goals.
Well, and any process improvement that you're also making along the way potentially would also impact the way that you want to position and brand the organization as well, right? Over time. So I appreciate your point for sure. Carly, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Stefan nailed it. The only add I would say is my knee-jerk reaction to it was they can happen at the same time. There's really no reason to kind of pace them out separately. I think they can, and to your point about, proof is in the pudding, they should be happening at the same time.
Got it. Excellent. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And briefly, Stefan, this is a kind of an interesting question. What was the most non-traditional candidate you've ever hired? So like, for example, a chef hired as a marketer, etc. I mean, we've all have, I'm sure you've got a story there. Yes, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that all the examples that come up to my brain are in the HR space, which is, there's a little bit of humor, like HR.
Just make something up for us. Come on.
Gosh. I mean, I think, let's see.
It's okay. No, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
That's all right.
Actually,
I think you and I are both poster children for this, Stefan, but yes, go for it.
I have one. So we were looking for data scientists, and hard market, especially 10 years ago, to really start to dig into. Not a lot of folks had it. Right. And I started to expand the search a little bit to think about like, okay, what is really a data scientist? What do they really need to do? And I started to look around, and actually a candidate that we ended up hiring was pulled from a naval engineering background, who had been a PhD working on that. But because of his capability, because data scientist was like just a small subset of what he needed to do in his role, he was able to take on that job and run. And now he's actually running the compliance section for sorry, I almost said the company, for a financial services a company. And it's just like, it's one of those things where you look at his resume and it's like underwater acoustics and ship design and all these things that you would never think would fall, be considered for a data scientist. He's actually leading the function now as a result of the fact that we just focused on a skill set that he had as opposed to his job titles or his experience.
Wow. Well, I'm a researcher, but I've never even played one of those on TV. So I can't argue with that. I think we're about out of time, Carly. So I wanted to thank you both, Stefan and Carly, and everybody for attending as well. And again, we'll make sure that folks can have a copy of the recording tomorrow that want to watch it again, and lots of great information that you shared today. Any final words, Carly, you want to share?
Thank you so much for having us. Really excited to bring more of this type of thinking in the future, and really appreciate the engagement from the audience as well.
Excellent. All right. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Sure.